So your neshama, your soul, outside of Israel can only get so big. And when it's in Israel, it can be 8 feet tall because it's in its natural habitat. This is the home of our soul. It really is.
What is home? Yes, we have our homeland Israel, and yes, we have homes throughout the diaspora. But our current reality is complex. Israel's at war, and anti-Semitism is rising around the world. So what does that mean for us? What does that mean for this question of home? Join me, Izzy, as I speak with Israeli and diaspora Jewry to better understand this new complex reality and unpack where we put ourselves in this physical and spiritual war. This is the My Israel Narrative podcast. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of My Israel Narrative. Today we are here with Lori Palatnik, who is the incredible founding director of Momentum, which if you haven't heard of it, you should look it up and look into it. I know people that have been touched by Momentum's work, and it's an organization that really looks to empower women in a real way, through the Jewish lens, through Jewish values, engaging with Israel, and really giving them the means to take action. And I actually have an aunt that did a Momentum trip, I guess, I don't know if it's 2 years ago now. She called it the birthright for moms. And she had the best time. I actually was living in Israel at the time, so I got to see her like every day or a few days in and out of her trip and get like the live feedback, and it was really incredible.
Wow.
And aside from Momentum, all that was unpaid sponsorship. But you also, Lori, are I know you do more beyond just the scope of Momentum, and you speak all over the world. You lecture, you write. You really are someone who clearly uses your talents through and through, and just someone that I thought of to speak to about this topic, and I know it interested you as well. So I'm excited to dive in. And before we do, I'd just like to start off, if you want to share anything we should know about you, anything interesting over the past few months, or something you want us to know you've been up to or involved with in the past few months, feel free to start there.
The last few months was a game changer, changed everything. My birthday's October 7th. I live in Israel, but I was actually for Sukkot, my family, we have 3 kids who live in Israel and 2 kids who live in the States. But I'm originally from Toronto, and all of my kids were born in Canada. We decided to gather, at least 4 out of 5 of them, for the holiday of Sukkot. And then on October 7th, which was the Shabbat and Simchat Torah and my birthday, my husband came home early from being at the synagogue and told me what's going on. And then everything changed. And we very quickly made shifts in our travel to get back to Israel as soon as possible. And my kids, interestingly, said, my kids from the States, they say, like, well, Ima, maybe, with a war, like maybe you and Abba shouldn't go back. I said, no, we're going back. And even my son, who wasn't able to join us because his wife was due in Israel, said, Ima, maybe you and Abba shouldn't come back. I said, no, we're going back. And it was crazy getting all the travel together. And I finally got to the airport. Like, there's no direct flights. Like, all the flights were canceled. Like, my flight was canceled. My husband's flight was not canceled because he was on El Al. I was on Air Canada. My kids were on Air France. It was like there were so many different changes. I finally was able, with the help of a friend, get on an El Al flight. And I had to get to JFK. And after doing everything and all the logistics, and I walk up to the counter. And as soon as I heard the El Al attendant just ask me some basic question, but as soon as I heard her Israeli accent, I just started crying. And then I came back and I was inside the war, just going. I immediately gave blood. I went to, I started something called Hugs for Heroes, which women, like all these, we have 23,000 alumni families in 36 countries from Momentum. And they were saying their kids, how do I explain this to my kids? What can we do? And I said, get them to make drawings and messages for the soldiers and scan them and send them to me. So we started Hugs for Heroes, and now we're doing it with the Ministry of Diaspora Affairs. And so I immediately started going, and I went really within days of October 7th. I was in Be'eri, and I was in Sderot. Like, they were still taking bodies out. Like, it was so intense, and the only people there were soldiers and police and international press. And we were giving out these messages to the soldiers and bringing them drinks and food and whatever it is that we could do, and listening to their stories. And the spirit was so high. But we see now over months how things are shifting and changing, and how now, like, still the spirit is high amongst the soldiers, but they're saying, I can do this, but my wife, she's having a hard time at home with the kids alone, and my mother, she can't sleep at night. So there's the war front, and then there's the home front, and we have to support both.
It's incredible. I mean, you're clearly somebody who sees a purpose and jumps after it, jumps on it. That's not something I think everyone can attest to. And I guess what I'd want to double click on, as they say, you mentioned that the second the war started, and we heard this from various accounts, namely, individuals that were going to Miluim, reserves, coming from abroad, jumping on a plane and going back. What was your impetus to jump on a plane and go back? Because I was in Israel. I had the reverse experience for other reasons, but I was watching all the people that were jumping on a plane to leave. So I would just love to hear from your perspective, like what drove that? What was so obvious to you? Like, no, I'm going back in this moment.
Because that's where my home is, and my home was on fire. My home was on fire, and I needed to go. There was no question. My family was in trouble, so I wasn't going to run away. I was going to run too. There was no question. There was not even a thought in my mind not to go.
It's incredible. I have this like stark imagery in my mind when I left. So I was living in Israel a few years ago, and was living there alone, and for many reasons made sense for me to come back. And in the process of doing so, I flew through Rome. And when I was in the airport, lo and behold, this huge airport, I'm walking to get to the terminal from Rome to New York. Where do I end up? At the end of the terminal with the most security, right next to the El Al check-in desk. And I said, Hashem, this is funny. Yesterday I left Israel crying, and now you're putting me here next to the people that are sitting here for 3 days to get on a plane back to Israel. They were begging. They were sleeping in the airport. And my heart was like, but I knew I was doing what I had to do. It wasn't like even a question. Like I thought for a moment, like maybe I'll go try and get on that plane. But I just turned to one of the families there, and I just said to them in my little broken Hebrew, just like, you're going to the real deal. Like I'm just pray that I get back there. And it was such a crazy moment to think that we really are people that think like that we don't, more people went into the war zone than in normal times. I think we say that
it's not normal. The country's population grew by 3%. What country, when a war breaks out, their population grows? And I have met people and soldiers who have, because we were doing, Momentum has been doing missions, and we're bringing solidarity missions. And one of the things we do on the last day is we do a barbecue with the Dudavan Miluim soldiers. And they're all telling stories of I dropped everything, I was in Tampa. I dropped everything, I was in Switzerland. I dropped everything, I was hiking through India. One of the women who works for us, her name is Stacy. She said her son had already been released from the army, and his dream was to climb Mount Everest. And he worked hard, and he saved his money, and he was halfway up Mount Everest. And then he heard that the war broke out. And he took the rest of his money, hired a helicopter, and flew down and came back and immediately went in, and he got injured, and now he's trying to get back in again. Like, what people are like this? Who are we? What people? Nobody was going after these people. No one was going to go to Mount Everest to bring him back. People dropped everything. They didn't have to be told to be asked. Like, my home is on fire. My family is in trouble. Hineni, I'm here.
Just we really hear the call. We hear the inner call, and we're people that can't ignore it. And the more we ignore it, we just go crazy. So we go after it. That gave me chills, though. Like envisioning him in the middle of Mount Everest and deciding literally to be plucked out of there, most literally, and brought to the middle of a war zone. It's wow. I guess I'd love to hear a little bit about your origin story with Israel. Where did that begin for you?
So I didn't grow up, I was Jewish, but we weren't religious. And I knew Israel was out there somewhere on the map and far, far away. So we weren't anti-Zionist, but we weren't like, it wasn't, if Israel's on the news, we probably like listened a little bit harder, but it didn't play a major role in our lives. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s, and I had just won an award for a Christmas commercial that I wrote. I was working in advertising,
No.
working in radio. I like White Christmas and like a lot of the major Christmas carols were written by Jews. So I wrote I had won this national award for a Christmas commercial I wrote early on in my career, and I had my award, and I had my degree, and I had my job experience. So I decided I'm going to go see the world, and I got a backpack and I went backpacking through Europe, and under strange circumstances, I ended up in Israel. And I had not planned to go to Israel, but obviously God had other plans. And when I landed, I remember wanting to feel something like, oh, I'm here. It's like the home of the Jewish people. And like, I should feel Jewish here. And I'm going to feel something. And I didn't feel anything. But then the more I traveled and the more I experienced, I started to feel something. And at a certain point, I felt if I don't leave now, I'm never going to leave. I want to live here forever. And it didn't make any sense. So I left. But a year later, I had an opportunity to come back on a program called the Jerusalem Fellowships. And it was a 6-week study and tour program, long before there was a birthright. And this was like 1985. And all those feelings came back. If I don't leave now, I'm never going to leave. But this time I knew why. It had something to do with God and the destiny of the Jewish people and our role that we play in the world. And I had a lot of questions and I had a lot of things to work out. So I figure if I have questions, I'm going to get them answered here. And I ended up staying, I was like one more Shabbat. And then I decided to stay for the year. Sounds simple, but it was not. I had to uncomplicate a lot of things in my life. And sure. I made some choices and to try to figure out where do I fit into this. And I knew that if I had gone after the 6-week program, if I would have gotten back on that plane and gone back to my life, I never would have asked those questions or made those changes. I would have just got sucked back into my life. So being in Israel and having that backdrop and just being part of like living the dream, like this is like living history here, and being inside of it was very exciting to me, and it really touched me in certain terms of my idealism and wanting to make a difference in the world.
It's incredible. I'm curious because I have heard of not so many, but there are people who have told me that they get to Israel and they don't feel anything, right? Like the classic answer you want to hear is, I got there and I walked off the plane and I felt this rush of whatever exhilaration. And there are people that don't feel it, and they feel like they beat themselves up about it, and they feel like maybe something's wrong with them. So what do you think? Was there something in particular you think was the switch for you? Is there something that you could share that maybe can help people to create that kind of more tangible connection, or was it just purely spending more time and living and breathing?
You know what? When I stopped looking to feel something, then I started feeling something. And when I came back a year later and I was studying and learning, it's like learning and understanding. Here's the mashal, here's the metaphor that my husband uses, and he learned from a friend. He says, like that cactus that somebody buys you, and in Toronto or in Los Angeles or in Cleveland, and you put it over your windowsill. How much does that cactus grow every year? Like a millicentimeter, okay? That same cactus in Arizona is 8 feet tall. So your neshama, your soul, outside of Israel can only get so big. And when it's in Israel, it can be 8 feet tall because it's in its natural habitat. This is the home of our soul. It really is.
Just sitting with that one for a minute. I've heard a few of these analogies, like fish out of water, blah, blah, blah. But that one even doesn't really get me because I'm like, well, I'm still breathing over here. I'm out there. I'm not breathing as well, but I'm still breathing. But that's a very strong visual, and I feel that as having lived in both places, I see the difference. It's a friend that I were actually just speaking the other night. She said, "What do you do? Like, do you find that it's harder to connect here, to feel your drive, your purpose, whatever?" And I think I gave her the answer I wanted to hear for myself in the moment, which was like, no, like maybe you should have to work harder. But when I think about it, yeah, when I'm there, it's more natural. It's more what happens to me in a few years' time living there versus here. It's exponentially different. So, yeah, It's a beautiful way to put it. I in the theme of Israel and finding that connection. So I was just looking a bit at kind of how Momentum speaks about Israel, and that one pillar is really this Zionistic element, finding a connection to Israel. How would you? Because I feel like it is something that's kind of been tainted or especially right now, misconstrued in certain ways. How would you define Zionism today in the 21st century?
So
As
Zionism
a Jew.
is really it's the right of the Jewish people for self-determination. That's what it is. But the more you delve into it on a spiritual level, like if you see in the tefillot, like in the prayers, like we're always talking about Zion, like Zion. It's like that's we're yearning for it, we're seeking it. So for me, it is really, when I think about my great grandparents who perished in the Shoah, and for them, the idea of Israel literally was like, you might as well say, I don't know, just Mars. Like it's just like it's unimaginable that you would ever be able to get there, and that we would fulfill like 2,000 years of yearning and pleading and searching and seeking and dreaming. It just, and we get to live the dream. We get to live that dream. And the idea that God would answer our prayers after 2,000 years, and we're like, no, maybe I'll retire there, or maybe I'll be buried there, or maybe one day, or maybe next year, or, school system is very, very challenging. Now, and all these things are true. And all these things are true. And everybody has a different, but I have to tell you, my husband and I met here in Israel. We 37 years ago, we met here, and we got married in Toronto, moved back here forever. We had the wedding in Toronto, and we started our life. And 3.5 months into forever, the Jewish community of Toronto really wanted to hire my husband, and we made a 3-year commitment. That turned into 13 years in Toronto. We built up a whole community called the Village Shul, and then we moved to the States. And it took us over 30 years to get back here. And my husband will tell you, I did not give up for even one day that we're moving back. Not a day. Not a day. Everything I did and every choice I made, whether it was how to recover the couch, or what job I should take, or whatever we did, it was always pointed to Israel. Like, it's a joke in my kids' in our family. Okay, my kids I would stay up in the middle of the night and watch the Nefesh B'Nefesh planes land and cry like a baby. All right, and I would tell my kids, no matter where they lived, I'd always say, this is not your home, Israel's your home. And they're like, Ima the Zionist, Ima the Zionist. In the end, 3 out of 5 of my kids live in Israel. The 3 who said they would never live in Israel. And because I kind of brainwashed them. Like, I remember our son Moshe, like he came home, he was going to yeshiva in Denver, and he came home, we were living in Rockville, Maryland, which is like suburban DC. And he came home and he went to make a coffee, and he says, how come all the dairy mugs the handles are broken? I said, because we use them. He goes, well, why don't you buy more mugs? I go, because we're moving to Israel. He goes, you're always moving to Israel. I go, Moshe, when the last mug breaks, we're out of here. So our son-in-law reminded us of the story that he came to meet us for the very first time. He met our daughter in New York, and they were dating. And it was getting serious. So now she's bringing the guy to meet us, okay? And she comes into the house, and she's showing him the house. Like, this is that. He goes, what's that door? She goes, oh, that's to the double garage. And she opens it up, and there's no cars in there. It's filled with empty boxes, like piles of empty boxes. And he says, what's with all the boxes? She goes, oh, my parents are moving to Israel. And he said, really? When? She goes, they're always moving to Israel. Okay, like, this is how I lived my life and how I talk to my kids. And in the end, we did end up moving to Israel. 3 out of 5 of our kids live here, and I'm not giving up on the other 2.
Without the Shem. I mean, clearly, the secular world, the non-Jewish world, speaks a lot about manifesting. And what does Judaism say about manifesting? Yeah, think about it, believe it, daven for it. Right, Joe Hashem, you're putting your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, you make yourself a kli, you make yourself a vessel, and God will fill it. And that's what everything I did was just like always pointing to Israel. And But in the end, it's not like any other country. You have to merit the land. And it says in the Chumash, like it says, if you don't merit the land spits you out. The land spits you out. So after COVID, when God closed the borders and grounded the planes, and then finally when things opened up, I went and I was speaking in the United States. And I went to this Orthodox community, and I remember it was on Shabbat morning, and I said, like, basically I gave my pre-Passover, whatever, like thoughts, ideas, Torah. And then I said, okay, now I'm going to say something. And now I'm going to talk about something that I'm only going to say because you can't record me and because it's Shabbat. And the rabbi will probably never invite me back. Do you think I had their attention? They're all like, what's going on here? And I said, how did you feel when Israel said you can't come? And a woman said, she was like a plant. She said, I was so angry. I own a home there. Who are they to say I can't come? And I said to them, Israel's not Disneyland. You can't just go whenever you want. You have to merit the land. You have to merit. It takes merit to come. It takes merit to stay. And if you don't merit the land spits you out. So you think you left for this reason or that reason, or you couldn't come for this reason or that reason. God could change all those reasons like that, like that. So when somebody says to me, so how did you finally make this dream happen? I said, number one, I never let go of the dream. I was relentless. I hoped and prayed over my candles. Let us merit to live in Israel, in Eretz Israel. Let us merit to live in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. I just went for it all the time. I kept saying it. I kept manifesting it. Like you said, I kept brainwashing my kids. I talked about it. I said to people, like, if I wasn't doing the work I was doing in the Jewish community, I said, I'm only here to get you out. I said, we are guests in the diaspora.
Wow.
And guests are only as welcome as the host wants them to be. And you see what's going on now. You see what's going on now in the diaspora. So how do you boil a frog? Slowly. If you take a frog and you put it in boiling water, it jumps out. So how do you boil a frog? Slowly. You put it in regular water, and then you turn up the heat and turn up the heat and turn up the heat and turn up the heat until it's boiling and cooking, and it's over. So I believe that's what's going on. People are they're turning up the heat. So I remember going back. This was before even October 7th. I remember going back after COVID and going to the synagogue in Rockville, Maryland that we went to, and suddenly there was a security guard with a gun and a police car outside. And we never had that when I was living there. And I said to people, like, what's going on here? They said, oh, it's Joe, and he comes to the Kiddush, and we love him. Everybody gets used to a new normal, right? It just gets hotter and hotter and hotter. And now that I went, as soon as I just got back, I had to go. Our daughter had a baby, and so before I went to help her, I went to, thank you, I went to Florida, and I spoke a few times in Florida. So now I've been inside the war for 60 days, and now I go to Boca and Miami, okay, and Palm Beach. So of course they know there's a war, and of course they're aware of it, but they're very far away in every way. They really, really are. Yeah. And they were telling me, my kids on campus at this college and this university are changing on their phones their Uber profile name to make it sound not Jewish because they're afraid and because they want the Uber to come and to show up. Do you see what's going on? Like this is now the new normal. Now we're going to hide our Jewish names. Now we're going to put our Magan David, Magan David inside. Now people are taking their mezuzahs off their door. So, and that's going to become the new normal. And it just keeps boiling and boiling and boiling.
I have many thoughts. I'm trying to, I'll tell you just one.
Izzy, I do want to say that I'm very apocalyptic and very optimistic at the same time.
No.
You know, it's not like opposites.
You should know. I think everything you're saying were things that I still think and say. I made Aliyah in COVID because I couldn't understand how as a Jew I wasn't allowed in Israel. I was so bothered by that. And I said, there's no way you're ever going to tell me I can't come to my country. And I picked up and came there alone with, I joked that I had 2 friends that I could pick up the phone and call. It was 2 weeks before my birthday. I said, oh, what am I going to do on my birthday? I said, I don't care. I'm going to go. And it was total siyata d'shmaya, and Hashem's hand showing me exactly when he needed to go, how he needed to go. There was no question. And I felt that feeling, what you're saying, of meriting to be there. Now I'm sitting on another side, though, where I'm trying to piece together the flip side of, I feel like something shifted for me personally. And it's not just my story. I mean, it's something that I'm kind of trying to bring out, because there are, especially right now in the situation, a lot of circumstances where people, for several reasons, were in a way spit out or asked, like quite clearly, like, and there's this question, but then how much do you fight it? That could be its whole own conversation. I'm happy to get into it, because it's something that kind of gets at me.
Listen, if it takes merit to come and merit to stay, then and when I was out there and people would say, oh, because people say, well, why don't you live in Israel? I said, well, obviously I don't merit it yet. I'm trying to like, my whole life is pointed towards Israel, but obviously I don't merit it yet. And they said, well, if you don't merit it, who merits it? Okay, but that's not how it works. Everybody has a different level where God says, I gave you certain talents, skills, potential opportunities, and resources. I expect you to use them. And just like expect each one of your kids to be exactly the same, or to have, and they have different potentials. So we all have different potentials and different levels of merit. So there's certain things that God expected a lot of me, and I just kept giving him my all. But when we got here, I said to my husband, because we moved back 5 years ago, thank God, and it's a blessing. So I'm so grateful. And I said, we have to merit the land. We just can't come here and go like, yay, and we did it. Here we are. Okay. No. What are we going to contribute to the country? We now, every few weeks, we go to a different city in Israel, different town, a different city, different settlement, and we do a Shabbaton, and we speak, and we figure out like what are the needs here and what's going on. Like, we're doing our R&D to get a lay of the land, literally, like, what are the needs and how can we fit in and what can we contribute to be part of the solution and not the problem.
It's incredible. So it's funny. It just made me think. Someone said to me when I left in the war, they said, "Yeah, I actually think that was." But when I left, I was like very clearly to Hashem, I was like, "I'm not running. Like, this is it. This is the place, and I'm coming back." And somebody said to me, "Well, yeah, I think you did the responsible thing, because I think you would have just been a liability to the country." And I said, if that's, I mean, that would be problematic. Like, if that's the way that I was looking at the situation, then yeah, I would, like you're saying the opposite. You're like, I'm going to do everything I can to make myself worthy of being here. Like, actually provide for the land, be an active participant in the land. And
listen,
I don't know if I ever thought about it so actively. I think that's really special.
Most of life is showing up. All right.
Yeah.
I have to tell you, when I was sitting Shiva for my father 5 years ago, I remember everybody who showed up, who came. And there was reasons why some people couldn't make it to the Shiva or whatever it was. And I, as a person I don't go to every Shiva, but now I do, I try to. And I used to not go to weddings because I'm so busy and I'm in a different country, and all the time it's hard for me to go to the weddings I'm invited to. But after I had our first wedding, I didn't know what it felt like when people showed up. That each person added to my simcha, and each person who came to pay a Shiva call comforted me, gave me comfort. So I didn't know, as the person receiving, how it felt. So now we go to simchas, we go to weddings, and we go to Shivas, because now we know how it feels, because most of life is showing up. And 2 or 3 people actually said the same thing to me that you said, that person said to you. Oh, you're probably just a liability anyway, so you might as well leave. And it's just not true. Your presence alone is adding to the strength of this country. It's like being part of a family. Like, okay, well, I don't have a job and I can't really, or I'm too young to so I'm just a liability in the family. No, you're not. Everybody in the family counts. I don't care if you're in a wheelchair or you're in a stroller, okay? You're part of this family. What do you mean? It's like we're in this together. And it's not complete without you. You complete the family. And anything in Israel that you contribute on top of just being present is bonus.
Right. So, I mean, even just walking the land is a mitzvah.
Walking the land, every shekel every dollar you spend here, we tell the women who come on Momentum, every dollar you spend is a mitzvah. So they call up their husbands. I'm doing a lot of mitzvot.
I love it. I take them to the take them to the shuk. Yeah, no, it also just goes to show. I mean, everything is really it's your intention, your perspective, and I think what's interesting is that right now, like you were saying, you went to Florida and you were speaking to a community there, and I would imagine, maybe think I know from friends in Israel. I just went back for a brief trip, and speaking to friends there, it's so obvious. Like, what are you doing? Like, why aren't you planning? And from this side, it's also obvious, but for a lot of people, it's not obvious. And they're still, we are in the boiling water. It is not slow. If you think it's slow, it's because, I don't know, you're closing your eyes or you're sleepwalking. I'm not sure. It's not slow. and so I guess what I would love to hear from you, in addition to that kind of, if there is anything in addition to what you share with that community so bluntly, if there is another message, even a way for people to begin being practical about this, putting our hearts and our minds in our, not just our hearts and our minds, 'cause I think everyone's hearts and minds to an extent are in Israel, but like really tachlis, like in a grounded way, are moving in that direction. If that is the call of the hour,
So
which I think from your perspective it is.
There's Jewish law, like if you're you're supposed to face east. If you're outside of Israel, you face east. Like when you're praying, like you're in America, you're in Canada, and so the question is like, what happens if you don't know which way is east? So it says that you point your heart to Jerusalem. You point your heart to Jerusalem. It's happened to me a couple of times where I didn't know. And it was, I didn't, it was Shabbat and I was someplace like, and I didn't know which way was east, and I couldn't use electronics or anything. So I just pointed my heart, and I really like centered myself, and I pointed my heart to Yerushalayim. And it was very meaningful. I was hoping it was east, but even if it wasn't, it was like I was pointing that way. So that's the advice I would give somebody is, if you can't be there now, point your heart there, and then everything else will follow. If you point your heart there, then your body will follow. And that means, again, practically, I tell people, like, if you buy a place in Florida before you buy a place in Israel, I don't even want to talk to you. Okay? Florida is not the land of our people. And people, they're going to buy a second home. Okay? Like, we'll buy one in Florida or we'll buy one here. Like, no, you should, at the very minimum, if you have the money, buy a home, buy land, buy a share in Eretz Israel. It's to have a share in it. Like, we owned a home here years before we moved here. We didn't even own a home in America. We owned a home in Israel, and a couple of times my husband wanted to sell it because crazy. He wanted to pay bills, and I said no. And I almost always say yes to my husband because I'm very flexible. Like, you want to do this, fine. You want to do this, fine. So I said no. I said, that's my oxygen line. Okay, like, I can do what I do outside of Israel because I feel like I own a share in Eretz Israel, and that's my oxygen. Don't take away my oxygen. Wow. And he thanks me now, because we wouldn't have had the money, but that money would have been gone. Okay, we would have paid bills and made weddings, and so now, but we had a property and we built on it, and the property only goes up here, and in a practical way and also in a metaphysical way, like to own a share here. So that's, if you can own a share, or you could spend summers here, or you take a sabbatical year as a family, okay, and just like come for a year and try it out, or come for summer, or send your kids on gap years here, whatever it is. Everything, just point your life towards Israel, and then I just would beg Hashem. I would pray, and it was like that I should have the merit, and that my family should have the merit, and constantly, always, and never, ever, ever, ever giving up.
I think that's a message you could apply to a lot of things in life. It's an important one to hit home. Yeah, but I think right now, in the midst of what Am Yisrael is going through, and a lot of people fighting and trying to understand what's next, what's right. So we have to find that clarity within. I think step one to even putting your heart to Israel is because there's a lot of people don't even feel it. Again, like asking yourself honestly, why, like, how do I get that desire? Because I think it's important. I think it's important. If we wouldn't pray there, it's not random that we just pray facing Israel. It's not just to show some. It's because most literally, like you're saying, our heart is tied in that direction, and you can't just do the physical actions. You have to feel it. So I think it's also incumbent on each person to start to try and find a way to feel it, And then to start, once you get that visceral feeling, be able to say, okay, so what am I doing practically? How am I going to hopefully, make that real decision, move. Wow. A lot of food for thought, just for me personally. So I wish we had more time. I guess I'll just ask if you have any final closing words. I like to ask also sometimes, just even, you kind of started off with it, but in a few closing words, just to describe home.
They say home is where the heart is. So really, you can make your home anywhere, depending on where your heart is. And it shouldn't be, and I don't want anybody to think that if you live outside of Israel, that you shouldn't be happy and you shouldn't have meaning and you shouldn't have joy and you shouldn't contribute to your community and you can do incredible things. But you have to know that God doesn't need you to do any of that there. Like people were saying, like, oh, I'm doing so much good work here in name your city. I thought I was doing good work too, but God doesn't need me. Right? It was my pleasure and it's my opportunity. God can do it without me. He really can. He can do it without me. We have to know that, our rabbi says that, our rabbi of blessed memory, he said that the founding of the state of Israel was a miracle in our times. Can you imagine? A miracle in our times. And we get to taste that miracle. We get to live that miracle. We can be inside that miracle. It's precious. We shouldn't take it for granted. You see that before October 7th, we literally internally were tearing each other apart. You see that outside of Israel, that Israel became a controversial value before October 7th, that there were, I know, federations where their donors were saying, like, don't send my money to Israel because they didn't agree politically with it. And now people are pouring and like throwing their money at Israel. So we can do it the easy way or we can do it the hard way. When if your child is far away and you know that it's not good for them and that they're messing up and they're making mistakes and you want them home, you'll do anything you can to bring them home. You would do anything, even to the point where, people do interventions and even cause pain to make sure that the child that you love really lives the most meaningful, fulfilled, and safe and joyous life possible. And God is in a lot of pain when his children are very far away. And that doesn't mean just physically, it also means spiritually and emotionally. And you see that really we should come home because we are focused on our shared values, because we are unified, because we understand our role in the world, that we're supposed to be a moral light unto the nations. Or we can have an existential threat that forces us to come together and to love each other and to care about each other. And we are not a religion, we are a family. We are a highly dysfunctional family. And we are going to come through this, but we should be focused right now on the day after. How do we keep this unity, this love, this reawakening of our Jewish identity all over the world? People have never felt more Jewish. It shouldn't be that it's through something negative. It should be through something very, very positive. And again, through the love and sense of responsibility we have for each other.
100%. I like to think of it that we're in this continuum of the already existing day after, that we right now are in it. And it's not because it's over, but because I feel like sometimes when we think about it as after, so it's like, okay, and then, but like right now, and like just make that, this is it. Like, this is what we're going to continue to do and be and how we're going to continue to think. Hopefully we can really hold on to that, because I've gotten to a point, I feel like a lot of people are saying this, where it's like, for me, there's no other option. If it's not different this time around, I don't know if I could, whatever.
Listen,
not up to us, but
we've gone through a
crossed.
lot. I do want to say one other thing, that our rabbi taught us the difference between happiness and joy. Happiness is taking pleasure in what you have. It's counting your blessings. It's being very present. Simcha is knowing that there'll be future happiness. Because if you think about it, what do we call a simcha? Like a brit milah, we call a bar bat mitzvah, a wedding. It's not the moment, it's the potential of this new life, the potential of this new couple. So it's very future oriented. So he taught us that even when we're in our greatest pain and we're sitting shiva and our heart has been ripped out of our chest, We should have one track on simcha, knowing there'll be future happiness. And if the Jewish people hadn't always had one track on simcha throughout the millennium, through all the tragedies and the trials and the tribulations, we would have given up a long time ago. That the greatest moment for the Jewish people is right around the corner. Never, ever give up.
Amen. Wow. Thank you. Really, thank you. It was really an honor, a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Israel Narrative. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow along and subscribe. Until next time, I'm Yisrael Chai.